callers for calling in. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Good evening, listening audience, and welcome to another edition of Unlock the Door Radio, where we try to explore issues in a way that you don't see so much in the mainstream media. But yet, the issue we're going to deal with tonight is something that you do see little portions dealt with in mainstream media, but it doesn't all connect together. And sometimes it's very important when you're researching subjects and trying to get a grasp on what's coming up or going on or whatever. It's a good idea to try to put things all into one category instead of having them all into separate categories. I mean, heck, if you have a doctor, you want him to be an expert at how the human body works as a whole, don't you? You don't want him to be just an expert on how the finger works or how the toe works or something like that. You want him to know everything. Now, the issue that I think we need to explore a little bit here is our future. And what I mean by the future is, where is America, Western Europe, Asia, essentially, where's the whole world heading right now? And I don't mean this in some sort of apocalyptic way. I don't mean this to come across as being a dystopian future, although it could be. I don't want it to come across as a utopian future, although it could be. The issue I want to deal with is, where is life going to be like in the year 2030 to, let's say, 2050? Now, most of my listening audience, I hope, is still going to be alive between the years 2030 and 2050. You'll be older, but I want you to think for a moment. 2030 is not that far away. It's about 15 years away. But let's think about how life has changed since the year 2000. All right? I remember one of the big issues in the year 2000 was, do you really need a cell phone? And then a few years later, it was, should kids have cell phones? And then, of course, now it's more like the issue of, at what age do you give a kid a cell phone? I mean, they already have games to introduce infants to all of this new technology. The same can be true of the internet. In the year 2000, there were a lot of educators that did not use the internet to supplement their materials or to keep records or so forth. And now, I think it'd be very hard pressed not to have an educator that's online and using the internet to get information. I mean, heck, you can connect to the whole world. You can get everything. I mean, you can access books in libraries all across the world. Then we look at other issues, of course. We look at where we are economically in the year 2000 and today, and there's been some major changes I'm going to deal with. We take a look at issues such as the police state. I mean, things have certainly changed since 2000. Where's it going? I mean, are we heading to a future that's going to be better, or is it going to be worse, or is it going to be something so different that it's hard to even comprehend by today's mindset? I think it's going to be a little bit of all of those things combined. Now, the thing is, we could go into so much detail. So where should we start? Well, I think basically we might take a look at a lot of the predictions that are made, not by just, far out visionaries and so forth, but we could look at such sources as Global Trends 2030. Now, if you go onto the internet and you look up Global Trends 2030 Alternative Worlds, you can actually download this. Now, it's a very long PDF file, but it's very interesting reading. And it's turned out by the National Intelligence Council, which means that what they were looking for, the intelligence agencies of the United States, what they're looking for is where the world will be in 15 years. And it's very important to know these things because you need not just to look at where we're at now and where we're going to be in like a year. You've got to be very visionary because the entire landscape of everything, intelligence services, economics, war, can change so dramatically. I mean, take a look at the fact that in the year 2000, if you said something about drones, the only thing people might think of is the flying robots that were in the Terminator series. And now drones are just mainstream. They're used in so many aspects of our national defense. Although I don't know why we're not using them more on ISIS. That's kind of a strange paradox that we use them in really remote areas of Waziristan. Yeah, there is a place called Waziristan. And, we bomb places like that. But when you have ISIS out in the middle of the desert, all exposed, nothing happens. That's kind of weird. But anyway, that's a whole nother issue. The thing is that drones may soon replace regular pilots. And again, this is something that I'm going to go into in more detail if you bear with me here. But if we think about the fact that, it's something that, yes, they were researching in 2000, but they had not been rolled out yet. And now we're talking about replacing pilots with them. There's research in a whole lot of things right now. The United States, for instance, is researching such things as how to use robots in warfare, whereas the Japanese are researching how to use robots to take care of old people or maybe take care of young men who are not ready to settle down and find a real wife. Maybe they can have an alternative that's more synthetic. Get visions there of the newer Battlestar Galactica series. So, and I'm sure there'll be a few models that when they run those out will look like the characters from that series. But anyway, the thing is that what's being worked on in labs now is a pretty good indication of what's coming. Oh, I should also note that a lot of the stuff when it comes to the defense industry, you got to remember that kind of stuff is that they show that you can see on YouTube, and sometimes the alternative media will say, "Oh my gosh, look at these robots! I mean, these drones. I mean, this is really scary." You got to remember that's stuff that research facilities are willing to let you see now. Okay, that's what they don't mind the Chinese and the Russians and whoever seeing that America's working on. You can just imagine some of the stuff that they're working on that they don't want anyone to see right now. And I've heard such things as, for instance, there's talk of using nanotechnology in areas not just for helping people. I'll go into nanotechnology later. But also think about the effects if you had a nanobomb. You program it that it will eat these microscopic machines that, if you spread them over an area, they could perhaps dissolve an army that was invading an area. You wouldn't have to use nuclear weapons and ruin all of your landscape. You could actually just program these things to live for or operate for only a short amount of time, but just long enough to dissolve whatever army you dropped them on. But anyway, if we take a look at what's going on in the world today, well, one area that's talked about in Global Trends 2030 is, again, I don't want to go into a lot of the stuff dealing with the fact that cities are going to get bigger. That doesn't mean populations are going to get bigger, by the way. I don't think the population of most countries, unless you're talking about Africa, but when it comes to Europe, when it comes to much of Asia, Latin America, it doesn't mean the population growth is really high, but it means that people are moving away from the rural areas into urban zones because that's where the work is. I mean, we see these water shortages in California, and people, there's some people like, oh, this is, there's water shortages. See, global warming. But then I have to remind people, in 1900, the area that now Los Angeles is built on, San Diego as well, was a semi-arid landscape. All right. The reason it got so much water is because as the city grew, Los Angeles grew, they basically muscled the water supplies away from the farmers that lived up towards the mountains. And they basically, I would say, if you're using strong arm tactics, you're basically stealing the water from the farmers. Then they built these giant aqueducts and they brought the water down from the mountains. And that allowed Los Angeles to grow. The problem is, again, it's an arid area. And if you get a situation where there's not enough snowpack up in the mountains, then you're not going to have the water supply to give to that region. And it is a region that's growing not just from people moving in from, the United States, but also a large influx of people coming in from Central America and other parts of the world. So the population there is growing because it's a location that's growing, but it's still a semi-arid area. It's an artificial landscape that has been built there. A city that is not built on a large river system that can supply its water. Like, for instance, St. Petersburg, Russia, or Paris, France, or London, England. Okay? They're all on large rivers that they can get water from. Not Los Angeles, okay? And the thing is, though, that we're going to see cities such as Los Angeles, Mexico City, Rio, and so forth. These are cities that are going to grow because, again, people aren't worried about that. Oh my gosh, they're having water rationing. If you can get jobs that pay 4, 5, or 6 times more than if you stay, in a smaller community. So we will have cities growing. There may be competition more for resources, especially in areas such as Africa, which could pit the BRIC nations, Brazil, India, Russia, China, up against the West even more. Maybe part of the problems we're having today is because the realization is that Africa is the new strategic area. And, much of the cause for World War I was because of a competition for colonies between the more established colonial powers of England and France versus the up-and-coming nations of Germany, Austria. And the thing is that when the times have changed, the weapons have changed, but the scenario is kind of the same. If your economy is to grow, you need to have lots of resources. And so you're going to see a competition in Africa for those resources. But that's not what I really want to talk about at this moment, although it's very important because it may dictate, for instance, what's going to happen in regards to World War III. But what I want to touch on here is the discussion dealing with human augmentation. Now, it seems that when I first heard they had artificial limbs that could read such things as the mind or could in some way be connected to neurological tissue, within the body, nerve cells. When I first heard about that, I thought, a few years ago, I was like, what? No, I don't think that's correct. I think this is some sort of fanciful, again, sci-fi type thing. And then I find out it's true. And the idea is, and I've seen some pretty, well, some people would say disturbing, and other people would say intriguing predictions that in the future, perfectly healthy people will go in and have body parts replaced. Maybe you'll have one of your eyes taken out and replaced with a robotic eye that will enable you to see perfectly in the dark. Maybe you'll have go read this stuff, Global Trends 2030. Okay, it's not the National Enquirer, it's not Weekly World News. It is a pretty reputable source, I believe. It just deals with the idea of human enhancement. It doesn't go into a lot of specifics, but then you can add the specifics, the research into such things as, people will go in and have maybe a leg or an arm replaced. Maybe having an artificial arm will be a good thing to get certain, be able to do certain work, or just an athletic thing, or maybe more, if 100 years ago you'd have told people that women would go in so they could have their breast size increased, people would have laughed at you like, why would anyone do that? You're insane. In fact, in the 1920s, because of the flapper era and the short plunging dresses, the one thing women would do is have their breast reduced or actually removed so they could better fit into the styles. And now we have breast augmentation, one of the most common procedures in the United States and much of the rest of the world. So I don't think it's not too far-fetched to say that people would have body parts replaced, perfectly healthy body parts, maybe, could get to the stage where people could become fully cyborg. I mean, I've talked to people who, you ask them the question, if you could, for instance, young people, and you'll say, if you could just have like reproductive cells put on ice, freeze the ovaries in a fertility clinic or store some sperm away, would you then opt for the idea of just having your brain placed in an artificial body? Your choice of gender doesn't matter. Then you can just pick and choose, and then you'd be able to have children still. It's just that it wouldn't be in the natural way, and it would still be you, except it would not biologically. I mean, what would be you would be your brain, essentially. And it used to be just a few years ago, you asked that, no young person would say yes. I mean, even the most hardcore Trekkies that might be, thinking about those kinds of issues and stuff like that, they would say no. Now, you ask people and they're like, wow, that would be so awesome. And so you may be getting into an era where people are becoming more and more and more comfortable with the idea of blending human and non-human synthetic apparatuses together. I mean, we do have cyborgs. I mean, Dick Cheney's heart, I heard he's got a lot of stuff in there. But we also have a lot of people have artificial limbs now. And, with some of them, you can go running. And people have various apparatuses hooked to their brains and so forth to help them recover some sort of senses. So I don't think it's too far of a stretch that once these things get more advanced and they become less bulky, that are less hydraulic and more fiber optic, that, where they would look, feel, operate, be able to send the same sensations to the brain as any other part of the body does naturally, that people will opt to do this. And it's going to be kind of strange. I mean, what would you do if your husband or wife decided to do that? I mean, when you wake up in the morning, you'd be there with them, but it'd be a body that's never changing. And the only part that really would be them would be the part looking at you through their eyes. Well, maybe even the eyes would be artificial. It'd just be the brain. And then you get to the question of, if you were to replace little parts of the brain with, synthetic material that would incorporate those memories, at some point in theory, you could actually create a totally synthetic person that used to be a biological person. Now, this is going to create a lot of interesting court cases and so forth. It's going to change ethics completely. But this is not the stuff of science fiction. This is the stuff of science exploration. And speaking of science exploration, when we're talking about such things as the surveillance state, which I don't want to deal with that much, but I'm bringing it up here just in passing, and that is one thing that we're really worried about is people listening in on our conversations we do on the phone, people hacking into our computer systems, being able to watch where we go, what websites we go to, being able to build a psychometric profile based on that. Now, have you ever thought about the idea that science is already talking about the idea that and they're working on this now, in fact, they're at the rudimentary stages, that you'll be able to get implants in your brain that will enable you not to have a computer anymore, not to use your iPhone, but you'll be able to automatically, with your own thoughts, connect to the internet and be able to get information. In the same way that you might be able to put a little thing in your ear and listen in on a conversation or something like that. No, you'll be able to actually merge into the web. Now, if you think about that for a moment, it's not only that you're going to be able to download stuff into your brain, see things, access information, and so forth. It also means the possibility that your thoughts do not have to be your own anymore. You can walk into a room and I don't know what kind of safeguards they'll have, but you might actually be able to hear everyone's thoughts. It would basically mean everyone would be telepathic. Now, again, I like to ask younger people, college-age students, what they think of that. And you ask it depends on how you ask the question. If I ask the first question, like, how would you like it that everyone would be able to read your thoughts? And at first they're like, oh my gosh, no, that's a consensus. But then you point out that it also means that you get to go online wherever you are in the world and be instantaneously able to, maybe experience a virtual reality situation with people of your choice. You'd be able to read each other's thoughts. There'd be no secrets anymore. But of course, you look at Facebook nowadays, people put information on Facebook that 20 years ago people would have said, there's no way people would share this sort of thing with the whole world. And voila, now they share everything from their lunch to, their shots in a bikini, drinking a tequila on the beach with some guy they just met, in Mexico or something. And, they're willing to share this with the whole world. They share their, people do these psychological tests on Facebook, and some of them are actually fairly reasonably accurate. Most of them are just stupid, but some of them actually use actual diagnostic questions that are used to determine such things as personality disorders. And they share that. They'll actually share that information. So the next step, everyone just hooked up to each other. Why not? Now, the thing is, when you get to that stage, I think we're getting to a point where people are going to be willing to dispense with privacy. They already sort of are, but they'll be able to dispense completely with privacy to the point that we, in somewhat of a, I think in Hinduism, the highest stage is merging into one. You could have like a one consciousness in a sense. And that's a possibility that some scientists have talked about. And I don't know, it sounds, to me, it's not very appealing. To other people, some people think that's really cool. Become part of the Borg and share. Wasn't that what the whole Star Trek thing was about with the Borg? They all shared each other's thoughts and so forth. And, there was no independent thought ultimately because everyone had the same thoughts. This could be our future. And, again, dystopian, utopian, you make the choice there. Now, the thing is, why would people, what's another reason people might want to go the cyborg route? because that's what a cyborg is. Not a robot. It is that you're human, but you start augmenting yourself. So you're something different than human. And so, what would be a reason people would do that? Now, I remember I watched a documentary that was featuring Hugo de Garis, and he wrote a book about the future and so forth. And in it, he speculates that humans, in order to compete with computers, might choose to augment themselves. You put stuff into your brain that will expand your IQ, many, many, many times. You become a computer, but you're still a biological creature. And there might be 3 different classes of people. There might be, there'd be actual robots that were constructed in a lab. By that time, I guess it would be a manufacturing center. Then you would have cyborgs, people that were a combination. Maybe, who knows, maybe 99% robotic. Or maybe just 20% robotic, who knows. But still, much of them would not really be human. And then you'd have the humans. Now, here's the interesting part about what a lot of people predict, if that could be the future. The humans would be very natural, but they would be so primitive in their abilities. If you were a cyborg and you were talking with a regular human, and you could access things just as quick as if you're sitting there, like you think about if you were on Google and you were able just to instantaneously get information. Then talking to a human being might be kind of boring, to say the least. Maybe the computers in the future would, or the human computers would kind of feel like, oh my gosh, do I really want to bother with these people? And are they even really worth the use of the resources that, of the planet? And they're not very efficient. And that brings me to a very interesting point here. We are getting to an area, and I'm going to go into biotech in just a moment, but we're getting into an era that is unprecedented. Now, yes, there are people that feel this is probably what existed during Noah's time, that people had the ability to, at least in biological terms, be able to alter the human DNA and start playing around with it. But we are advancing when it comes to our robotics, and we are advancing in regards to our genetics. It's hard to say which revolution will have the greatest impact on us. But I personally believe that what we are at right now is that, it's not even the infancy. It's more like the conception stage. We are in the early fetal stage of our developments in regards to biotechnology and being able to alter what it is to be human. And I think that by 2030, it'll be fairly common to have couples that will go in and just like, that kind of it's illustrated on Gattaca, but, that's not too far off, that you'll be able to pre-select ovums. This one here has these traits that will grow up to be this kind of person. This one here has these traits that will grow up to be this kind of person. That could become very, very common. Especially, I know women that have diabetes, and I know 2. One of them probably, she loves kids, but she said she probably won't have any because she doesn't want to pass her diabetes on to her children. And then, I just say, well, then you marry someone that has no history of diabetes, but still, it's a toss-up whether it would be inherited from her or him. Now, let's say she married someone, I know another person too, but I think she'll have kids, but still, it's something. I also know one other woman. She's 45. 45. She chose not to have kids because of diabetes. Now, what if we had the technology available that these women, that would normally have had kids or want kids, were able to, even if they married a man who had predispositions towards diabetes, you could give them some fertility medicine, have them pop out a whole bunch of egg cells, fertilize all those egg cells, and then screen which ones have both what would be the expression of the diabetes, where that kid's going to have it. You'd also be able to see which ones had enough of the DNA makeup that it would carry on into the next generation. Maybe it wouldn't affect them, but it would be a weakness that could be passed on to to their children. Or you find the egg cells that hooked up with sperm, and they have no diabetes whatsoever. So you save those, freeze them, and then plant them as time goes on, and you've effectively eradicated diabetes from your family because you've already screened out the DNA to be able to know that these kids will not have it and they won't pass it on. That, I think, is going to become very common. I also, so right now it's just the really severe stuff that countries like England are saying, well, let's go ahead and let there be people that will donate healthy mitochondria when they're, so you have like 3 parents, when there's a situation where it could protect the child from a disease that might be passed on otherwise. The thing is, it'll start that way. And then it's going to progress to where we're going to have, of course, everyone's going to be thinking about the cosmetics. Everyone says, oh, I don't care. I just want a healthy baby. I don't care the looks. Yes, they do. And if the technology exists that you'll be able to have a kid that will be perfect, then you're going to go for that. Okay? People will go for that. Now, let's say we have a situation in which we go beyond even that. I was reading an article about artificial wombs. And in that article, in the article about artificial wombs, anyway, in the article on artificial wombs, it said that we may be by 2030 able, I'm just looking up the article here so you can look it up yourselves if you want. Let's see. Well, I don't think I have it. Oh yeah, here it is. It's an article in the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies called Artificial Wombs is a Sexless Reproduction Society in Our Future. Now, the interesting thing about that is that with artificial wombs, you would change a lot of social dynamics that exist right now. You would change things to where you first of all, there's a lot of men, let's say gay men, who would then have the ability to have kids without having to hire a surrogate. But you also have a lot of men who, if given the choice, would rather have a child and raise it themselves without getting married to a woman. I've met men like that. I've met both men and women who say the only reason they really wanted a husband or wife was in order to raise a family. Maybe they were kind of asexual. I don't know. But their idea was that what really counted was having a family, not the aspect of being married to someone. And artificial wombs could enable that. Artificial wombs would also enable people who, not just for health reasons, the ones that, might have problems carrying a child, but it would also enable people to, you go in there, you drop off, the egg and sperm, and come back 9 months later. And then everything is set. So if that's the case, then you have a situation in which you change a social dynamic that has existed throughout human history. You change it to where human beings are going to be able to, having a child is just like picking up a toaster or picking up a refrigerator, and you'll be able to pick up the child. Think about the ethical considerations in that. Oh, by the way, it was saying that the animal ones could exist by 2030. Human ones would be around, I think, a few years later. So think about how that's going to change society. You could be a cyborg And you could unfreeze an egg cell if you're a female, or who cares by that time? If you're a cyborg, you might be male, female, or both, and then be able to have a child raised in an artificial womb. Then we get into the whole consideration of what ages would people be able to start doing enhancements on their kids? That's kind of freaky. I mean, I think of it when it comes to adults, when it comes to someone 18 and over, if they decide to replace their body in this kind of era, fine, let them. But what about when we're talking about children, at what stage would you be able to enhance them? That's a very, very important factor, to be sure. Now, I want to get a little bit past a lot of the ethical considerations when we're talking about biotechnology and also human beings being able to enhance themselves. And I'd like to kind of get into how society is changing and maybe some of the positive things about it and negative, but how you can prepare for it, because you know what? This stuff is coming. There is no way you're going to avoid it. Okay, some of you may be thinking, oh, this cyborg stuff, maybe that'll happen in my grandkids' era. It's not going to happen in my era. Well, that might be true. It is going to happen, but maybe it's not going to be so soon. Well, what about the idea of robotics in general and how that's going to change all of society? Now, I was reading a blog from Robert Reich. If you remember him, he was the labor secretary under Bill Clinton. And he has a really interesting article. I would encourage you to go to robertreich.com. I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat. It doesn't matter, because he's very insightful in where things are going. And he has a title to an article called The I Everything and the Redistributional Imperative. And what he's saying is essentially that in our society, what we are getting to is, well, think about 3D printers, where you'll be able to print, you can print things. If you just have plastics, you'll be able to, you need a wrench and you don't want to run down to a store and get one. You can just go ahead and program a wrench. And if you've got one of these machines, it'll give you a fairly strong wrench that you'll be able to do your repair work with. But now Reich is pointing out that there's advances in this, that maybe you'll be able to get even more advanced in regards to what you're going to produce. Now, that being the case, okay, if that is the case and we are able to see more technologically advanced materials just able to be printed off, what happens then to our manufacturing center? I mean, it's kind of funny. I remember someone was joking about downloading, and they said that, at the beginning of these movies where they have that commercial that says, would you download a car? Would you steal a car? Then why would you download a movie? And someone made a comment saying, if I could download a car, I would do it. Well, maybe the future will be one in which you'll be able to do such a thing. But even if it's not cars, if we'll be able to manufacture materials in such a way that we'll be able to, you need a pair of eyeglasses, print it off. You don't need to go to this, you have to go buy the materials, but you'll be able to print off your eyeglasses if you just have the materials. You need a plate, print it off. It reminds me of some of these science fiction movies of the 60s where, you didn't bother washing the dishes, you just threw them away, or they were ground up and then reconstituted into new dishes. This may be a future we're heading for. And if this is the future we're heading for in that area, think about how many people you won't need in regards to working. Now, we already see reports it's fairly common. You probably won't see it in much of the mainstream media because, we're too busy with Kim Kardashian's rear end. That's really important, or which celebrity is doing what to who and whatever. But I find this article here in Tech Times, March 24th, if you want to look it up. It's called Robots Could Replace Half of All Jobs in 20 Years. That's right. And the thing is, it states here that let's see, it said, if you want to stay employed, this is quoting the article, if you want to stay employed by them, you better think about a career shift into software development, high-level management, or the information sector. These professions are only at a 10% risk of replacement by robots, according to Osborne. By contrast, lower-skilled jobs in the accommodation and food service industries are at 87% risk. Transportation and warehousing are at 75% risk, and real estate at 67% risk. The researcher warns that driverless cars, burger-flipping robots, and other automations taking over low-skilled jobs is the way of the future. Now think about that. Think about that. Those of you who've seen the movie Wall-E, most people don't think of Wall-E. They think of it as a Pixar cartoon. They don't think of it as a dystopian future, but in a way it is, and you should watch it. It's kind of interesting. It's the idea that everyone's gotten fat, on this space station when the Earth's kind of you don't know what's happened to the Earth, but it's in bad shape. So they're up in these massive space stations, and every whim is taken care of by robots. So you just sit there and eat and be taken care of. The thing is that think about the jobs there: taxi drivers, bus drivers. Wouldn't need those. Truck drivers. You just use a driverless system. Already we're seeing top scientists saying that self-driven cars are a thing of the past in a few years. People that we see filling up our, people that lost their jobs, good jobs around 2008 and before that, many of them have had to take jobs, in the service industries, bartending or whatever. And you know what? Those jobs are at risk in 20 years. So you're probably thinking, oh yeah, but I can think of, someone would rather have a real waitress than a robotic waitress. Really? Think about what you could do there if you had a human-like robotic waitress. You even have, I think it was Tyra Banks who said that in a couple of decades that photo models and so forth will be replaced with robots. So we may come into an era where our interactions are going to be with robots. Now, here's the weird part, though. Think about the idea that a guy goes into a strip club, in the year 2040, and there's a bunch of robotic strippers. But the idea would be, now this is the funny part, that they have an intelligence that would be 500 times greater than his. Okay? They're computers. They have artificial intelligence. They'd be programmed to do whatever job they're doing, but they could just as easily go and pilot a spacecraft to Mars. It would be, it's just what you would program them to do. Is there going to be a time when AI could decide that, for instance, what I was talking about a few minutes ago with Hugo de Garis, what he's mentioned, could we actually have a time when AI becomes very dangerous? And so we do have kind of a Battlestar Galactica scenario. If people would like, they can look up an article in Entrepreneur magazine, and it's in the artificial intelligence category, and it's called Steve Wozniak, semicolon, the future of AI is scary and very bad for people. And what's interesting is the article points out that there's no question that computers are going to take over a lot of stuff that humans are doing now. And, of course, machine intelligence is going to be so much greater than humans. And, they point out, in the article, it points out that people such as Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk have predicted that this could be very bad for people in the future. These robots we will be designing to do our work for us will also be able to enhance their own IQs. They will be, and at some point, maybe we'll start having robots build robots. And we'll get into a stage in which human beings really don't have to be part of the equation. And when we reach that stage, if we take a look at what our definition of a living organism is, okay, we usually say it carries out respiration and so forth. It can do work, meaning that it can react onto the environment, and it also has the ability to reproduce. Well, if you have if you have robots that have artificial intelligence to the point that they have reasoning abilities, of course programmed, but at some point they learn from one another, they enhance themselves, then if they can make replacement robots and they have the ability to look at different alternatives and decide between the two alternatives, don't we then have a new species? I mean, it can't reproduce on its own, in a way we think of, but it can sure make copies of itself. So we may be winding up in a situation where we do create not just something that competes with us in the job and takes, lots and lots and lots and lots of jobs that we're normally doing out there, but also may see us as a competitor in regards to space and resources of the planet. So, this is something to consider. Now, on the other hand, I don't want to paint a picture that is totally scary. I don't want one in which people start thinking, oh my gosh, the world's doomed. I might as well just check out and, and go live up in the mountains somewhere until it all ends. No, I don't say that. I do have hope that people will be able to rein this kind of stuff in. I still actually have hope and faith in humanity that we do have the ability to use rationality and to come together and set some sort of safeguards and demand certain types of laws and so forth to regulate this kind of stuff. But on the other hand, what's scary is we have an increasingly dumbed down population. People that you ask someone, you've seen those things on videos on the internet. Someone will walk up to someone in Washington State and say, can you name a state that's named after a U.S. president? And they're like, no, not California, no, and they don't know the answer. And they're in Washington State. And they don't even know it was named after George Washington. Are these the people who, is this a good population in this kind of scenario to be making these kinds of decisions? And on top of that, might we be aiming, if we don't as a people strive to enhance our intelligence on our own and be able to critically think, we're just going to be at the mercy of the small number of elites that are going to control this technology and use it for whatever means that are ends that they find appropriate. And personally, I think perhaps that in the future you're going to see an increasing emphasis on decrease of population. And you know why I think that? Because what are you going to do when you've got a country, already in the United States, there's more people that don't work of adults than work. Now, in fairness, many of those people, men and women, are on Social Security. And, they've worked and now they're retired. But what do you do about a situation in which you've got, where you may throw out tens of millions of people that are now working and paying taxes and you replace them with automation. You replace them with robots even. What are you going to do with them? Well, you can either distribute the wealth, redistribute all the wealth and stuff so that there's these heavy taxes on the people that still have work. Or what you could do is kind of use social control mechanisms and so forth to discourage family. And maybe we see that already today. You see a lot of competition with the idea of a man and woman getting married and starting to have children. It's almost like, oh, but you could be doing this or this or this or this or this or this instead of getting married and having a family. Who knows? Maybe that's going to increase when the idea that our population's going to be expendable in the sense that you don't need as many workers as you used to be able to produce goods and services. But then again, you may also have a situation in which, with all these technological enhancements, people will be able to develop technology that will perhaps lead us to a utopia. I want to be fair about that. If you suddenly, like for instance, you got a lot of old people that they have to work. They have to retire because they can't work anymore. If you could enhance their brains, enhance their musculature and so forth, to the point that they were still able to work and be healthy and not be a burden on the medical system, then think about the rewards to that. And a lot of this technology, such as nanotechnology, which I said I was going to get back to, the promises of nanotechnology are phenomenal. The idea that you could inject someone with a DNA program that it could go in and could change. You remember the movie Benjamin Buttons, the guy that starts out old and gets young. That could be possible, that you could get a situation where, person's 90 years old, they're in a rest home, but their DNA is still the same. Now, there's been maybe damage to their telomeres and that sort of thing. But what if nanotechnology could go in there and start reprogramming everything and replacing that which is damaged to where the DNA could be reset for 20 years of age? Well, that would be an interesting thing, wouldn't it? All of a sudden now you've got old people becoming young. All of a sudden, stories of people like in the Bible, in Noah's era, living to be 6, 7, 8, and 900 years old, are no longer far-fetched. They actually have it's a possibility. And so this is one of the things that when I point these kinds of trends out and people think, oh my gosh, the future is so bleak. No, it's not. There's a lot of good things that can come from this future as well. It just depends on how we use it. And I personally think, when I'm thinking about the fact that children born today, or maybe children that are like just young children right now, have a possibility of benefiting from a lot of this nanotechnology, a lot of the other technologies that could maybe push their lifespans to be 150 or 200 or even greater. There's no greater time actually to have a family, because the promise, there may be some dangers ahead, but there's also some great promises that could lead to a future where your children will have so much more than anyone else did. Because for the last who knows how many thousands of years, human beings have had to pretty much think, okay, I'm going to be young, and then I'm going to get middle aged, then I'm going to get old, and then I'm going to die. That's not going to be necessarily the case with a lot of this technological advancement. Of course, then again, many of the options might seem weird. With nanotechnology, you may be able to reprogram your body to be something totally different than what it started out being. A little tweaking here and there of DNA. Maybe you want to be a different racial group. Maybe you want to be a different gender. Maybe you want to be different, you want to be taller or shorter or whatever. You can program the nanotechnology to accomplish that. After all, DNA is nothing more than a blueprint. And it then directs our amino acids to react in certain ways. So it's a building process. It's like if you have a whole bunch of building materials and you suddenly change the blueprint. Yeah, well, then the building's going to be different, even though you still have the same building materials. And that is the way nanotechnology could work. So ultimately, I just want to take the last few minutes here just to say the future is not as bleak as some would say. It's not maybe as rosy as some would say. It does require, I think, that intelligence is going to be in much greater demand, because just regular brawn. Remember 1950s? You could go to high school, go get your job at the steel factory or the auto plant, and probably be making more money than your teacher in a year. Okay, and probably at some point live in a better house than your teacher lives in at that time. Then it kind of that has been dying since the 80s. since the late 70s, and then it just accelerated with all the trade agreements and so forth that you saw under, like, for instance, Bill Clinton. A lot of those jobs are gone now. And it's not totally because of outsourcing. It's also because of automation and, this increased desire to cut cost at any cost. So we have a situation in which employers, if they have 6 employees, but they can learn how they can get by with 4, they're going to do it. And then they're going to learn how to get by with 2. And maybe in 20 years, they won't need any employee to run the restaurant or to run the strip club or to run the auto sales room or even run a classroom. Why do you need teachers when you could have a robot do the job? So ultimately, I think the future is going to be one that's, it's pretty bright. It can be at least. Or it could be pretty scary. It can be at least. It just depends on what people do today and how they train their children up and bring them into this, I'm going to say, brave new world of the 21st century. Anyway, that concludes the show for this evening. I thank you for coming by, and I encourage you to stop by my YouTube channel at Michael Cross, or stop by and check my blog out at michaelcross.net. Anyway, thank you, and see you next week here at Unlock the Door Radio on UCY TV Productions.
Speaking of genetic modification, today's show is brought to you by the letters DNA. That's because scientists at the Scripps Research Institute have created the first organism with alien DNA. Wait, give me a second to explain. As you may remember from science class, double helix DNA strands are bonded together with 4 genetic letters, A, T, C, and G. Now, this new organism has all the above as well as an X and a Y. The living cell these scientists are then working with reproduced normally in the test tube with the inclusion of the 2 foreign DNA building blocks, X and Y. The next step is to get this so-called alien DNA to actually do something, like produce proteins that target cancer cells, or something even currently unimaginable.
Tonight we are hearing more about a major medical breakthrough. For the first time, scientists have created artificial DNA, the universal genetic code. Dr. John LaPook tonight tells us about the hopes and fears that come with this.
Scientists at the Scripps Research Institute in San Diego, California, created an organism not found in nature. They did it by adding artificial genetic building blocks. DNA is the genetic material the body uses to store the unique blueprint for each human being. The information exists as a code based on 4 chemicals, nicknamed A, T, C, and G. They pair up with each other in different combinations to create 20 amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. The Scripps team created 2 artificial chemicals called X and Y. They inserted them inside the cells of simple bacteria. That created the potential for 172 amino acids and proteins that do not currently exist. Those proteins could be used to create a new generation of drugs and vaccines. Adriana Heggie is the director of the Genome Technology Center at NYU Langone Medical Center.
What I think is fantastic about this technology is that we basically were able to cheat evolution and to trick this organism into accepting molecules that do not exist in nature.
This is a true technological tour de force, but the idea of tinkering with genetic material does make some people nervous. It all underscores the importance of careful thought as we increasingly are able to alter the basic genetic building blocks of our body.
And Homo sapien 2.0? According to a researcher at the Global Brain Institute, a completely new human species will inhabit the Earth in just over 30 years. Now, this evolutionary step could be comparable to the transition from apes to humans. Microchip implants will be placed in our ears and our fingers and make many devices completely obsolete. But this dependence on technology has its drawbacks, of course. In the future, humans are going to have to compete.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCI.tv.